Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming along this evening to Northern Ireland Humanists' 5th anniversary event. It's going to be a great evening. I am really happy to see so many people who have attended here tonight, and we're going to cover a fair few bits and pieces. And joining me tonight for the event is the one and only Tim McGarry, who I'm sure you all know very well, and who most of North Belfast just commonly know as Da. So welcome, Tim.
Hello. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Bad news, ladies and gentlemen. This is a terrible gig because there is no birthday cake whatsoever. I'm actually, you're not even, to bring your own event. Bring your own. This is Potching, you'll be glad to know. Celebrating 5 years of Northern Ireland Humanists. For those of you who don't know, I'm Tim McGarry, actor, writer, and Love Island reject. I have been involved with the Northern Ireland Humanists since I was recruited by Boyd Sleator in Queen's University in 2016. Do you remember 2016, Boyd? Do you remember we were so, were we ever so young when we thought, don't worry, stupid, Donald Trump will never get elected. Oh, don't be stupid, they'll never vote for Brexit. And
shake your hand.
Yeah, and I thought my son was going to join the Humanists, and the next thing I know, I'm doing a free gig for you in the Black Box and taking the piss out of AC Grilling's hair. I just want to say I'm very proud and delighted to be a patron of Northern Ireland Humanists. Joining the Humanists, I'm coming out publicly, and I don't want to compare this with anything else, but coming out as an atheist in Northern Ireland isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially if you're somebody like me who's got tickets to sell, because we like our religion here. But I think the Northern Ireland Humanists are a very, very important organisation. I think we have an awful lot to be proud of in the last 5 years. Boyd is probably going to mention this, but there is an annual report. It's not that long. It's easy to read. Get through it. You can see some of the achievements we have done over the last few years, and I think we can be very, very proud. And I think we are the future, ladies and gentlemen. That's my view. The number of atheists or humanists is growing exponentially. I think our membership is going from only a few hundred to 3,000. Is it now, Boyd? I think it's 3,000.
Very, very close to 3,000. That's correct, Tim.
Close to 3,000. It's a growing organisation. Some of our campaigns have been very, very successful, including the right to have a humanist wedding, the equal marriage, things like that, reproductive rights, all sorts of things are happening. There's a lot of progress been made. For anybody who's new to humanism and just joining in, all I would say is join in. Feel free to join us. If you're an old hand, thank you very, very much for what you've done over the last few years. I think we have a very bright future ahead of us. But we're going to start by looking at the past, aren't we, Boyd? We're going to
We are indeed. So interestingly, this is the 5th year of Northern Ireland Humanists as being in existence, but it's also the 125th anniversary of Humanists UK. And last year, Humanist UK brought on a Humanist Heritage Coordinator by the name of Madeleine Goodall. And Maddie started looking into different bits of humanist heritage, and she's come across a lot of interesting stuff about Northern Ireland, which actually starts 125 years ago as well. So Maddie, if we could bring Maddie on. Hello, Maddie.
Hello.
So, do you want to start for us and give us a cover what you've found out? I know you found out an awful lot, and I know we're only going to hear a little bit of it tonight, but I also know that the Humanist Heritage site will have different bits and pieces of this up online, so we can direct people to there to have a look at that work as well. But yes, Maddie, go ahead, give us an overview.
Thank you. If anyone has ever spoken to me or heard me speak before, you'll know that keeping it short and to the point is not my strong point, but I'm going to do my best. There is a whole load of really fascinating humanist heritage in Northern Ireland, so I'm going to try and speed through it. In order to do that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this event is obviously about celebrating the 5 exceptional years of Northern Ireland Humanists, but as Humanist Heritage Coordinator, naturally, I would say, I think it's also a great opportunity to emphasise the even longer history of humanism and free thought that's in Northern Ireland. It's really easy, especially looking over from England, to see the religious history of Northern Ireland as being one that's completely defined by sectarianism. But that does risk forgetting the many, many ordinary people who've lived humanist lives and expressed infidel opinions in Northern Ireland over many hundreds of years. This is, as Boyd said, the 125 years anniversary of Humanists UK, but it could also be seen as the 125th anniversary of the Belfast Ethical Society, which was formed in the same year, 1896, as the Union of Ethical Societies, which is what Humanists UK was known as then. Like a number of other secular and radical societies operating in the northern part of Ireland in the second half of the 19th century, the Belfast Ethical Society held lectures and discussions on science, society, politics, religion, the arts, and was firmly rooted, in this case, interestingly, in the Belfast labour movement. In common with other ethical societies at the time, and with the Union of Ethical Societies itself, the Belfast group took as their object the promotion of right conduct on a purely natural and human basis, and the intellectual advancement of its members, as well as the development of character independent of theological speculations. I can never resist a few representative lecture titles, so forgive me for these next few slides, but don't feel like you have to read the whole clipping. It mostly just tells you where it's happening. The society launched with a talk from the founding secretary, James Heron Gilliland, on the ethical movement. Other lectures in the following years included agnosticism in modern literature, and also these from Stanton Coit, What Think Ye of Christ? We don't know, because we don't know the subject or the content of that talk, but we can imagine, and Ethics as a Religion for the People. Note too, the selected quotations for this advert. So the death of dogma is the birth of morality, from Kant. The moral sentiment is alone omnipotent, from Emerson. And do what you can to do what you ought, and leave hoping and fearing alone, which is a nice one, from Huxley. Other lecturers to the society included rationalist and peace activist Hypatia Bradlaugh Bonner, ex-Catholic priest turned mouthpiece of free thought Joseph McCabe, looking fetching there in his monk's clothing, nursery school pioneer Margaret Macmillan, leading secularist Charles Watts, Labour Party pioneer Catherine Bruce Glazier, and future Lord Harry Snell, who was also to be a future president of Humanists UK. The two leading figures of the Belfast Ethical Society were clerk James Heron Gilliland and accountant William Knox. And it's interesting to note that although ethical societies were typically careful not to be accused of being atheist, both men were evidently non-religious. So this is Gilliland's 1901 census return, where he describes himself as rationalist. And by 1911, he is agnostic, or self-describing as such. William Knox, in both years, refused to answer. So he's listed as none in 1901. And it's noted that he refused information as to his religion. And in 1911, similarly, this is William Knox. I haven't managed to find a picture of Gilliland, but Knox is quite a handsome fella, and there he is. James Heron Gilliland, as I mentioned, was secretary of the Belfast Ethical Society for, as far as I can tell, its whole duration. He was a regular speaker there, as well as for socialist and secular societies around Belfast and Northern Ireland. He was also the organiser of Belfast's Cinderella Club, which was part of a movement to provide food and entertainment for impoverished children. William Knox was described in the memoirs of Belfast-born writer James H. Cousins as a one-eyed propagandist of atheism and socialism. Knox was also secretary of the National Secular Society's Ulster branch and of the Belfast Radical Association, among the aims of which was the disestablishment of the church. He was also actively involved in the Belfast Debating Society, the Belfast and District Workers' Educational Association, and was at various times president and secretary of the Belfast Cooperative Society. Open debate, adult education and cooperation were very often associated with the ethical movement and its members. And you'll see that if you visit the Humanist Heritage website, where lots of these things come up time and time again. The Belfast Ethical Society does appear to have dissolved in 1913, although there are adverts in the press that I've found for other ethical societies in Northern Ireland into the 1940s. Organised humanist groups, though, emerged again with gusto in the 1960s, as this distinguished panel from the first Conference of Humanists in Ireland in 1969 goes to show. So we've got here Owen Sheehy Skeffington, lecturer, senator, founder of the Irish Humanist Association, Douglas McEwen, physicist, X-ray crystallographer, and founder of the British Conservation Society, Professor Alan Milne, who was a political philosopher, remarkably, given that he was blinded during military service in 1945. John D. Stewart, playwright and personality, seems to appear quite a bit in press cuttings from the 1970s, identified as a humanist, drawing interestingly on Tim's point about being out as a humanist in Northern Ireland. Kedar Asmal, an absolutely remarkable person, politician, human rights professor, co-founder of the anti-apartheid movement in both Britain and Ireland, and Antonia Healy, who's the secretary of the Irish Humanist Association, which all leads me to the resolution from that conference, which seems like quite a fitting platform from which to launch into the rest of this evening's event and to celebrate all of the remarkable achievements and hopes for Northern Ireland humanists now. So this conference is resolved to strive for the achievement of peace, justice and tolerance in Ireland, and holds that outmoded attitudes and traditions which interfere with this achievement should be superseded by more valuable ideas and actions. The first steps to this are integrated education and secular laws based on evolving values and needs, and not on any authoritarian belief or system. And with that, I will stop sharing. And please do visit the Humanist Heritage site. Some, although not all yet, of what I've talked about is on there, but we're adding to it all the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maddie. That was super interesting. And I mean, it really is an interesting topic. I mean, back, I don't know, 6-8 months ago when we originally spoke about this and you started looking into this, it's just the information started pouring out. And even that last little quote that you gave there talking about integrated education, I think that was around about 10 years before integrated education started in here. Yeah. So a full 10 years before ethical societies in Northern Ireland with links to sort of humanism were thinking about integrated education. Tim, you're a historian, you're a massive history buff. I thought you were going to maybe enjoy this and maybe you have more questions there to ask.
It's fascinating, Maddie. I didn't even take you up on the fact that you suggested Northern Ireland has been around for 125 years. I'll let that go because it's only our centenary, of course, in 1921. But in fact, I actually met Kedar Asmal when I was involved in the at the apartheid movement, a great guy. But Sheehy Skeffington, I think, is probably related to another Sheehy Skeffington, who was a suffragettist in the 1916 rebellion. Those are fascinating. I love all that stuff. Do we have any idea, though, of these ideas, these organizations, would they have, I presume were they regarded as just fringe by the general public? From my knowledge of Irish history, particularly around 1912 and the formation of Northern Ireland, religion was a massive, massive issue. The whole creation of Northern Ireland is based on Protestants saying they don't want to be oppressed by the Catholic Church. The big argument then was home rule is Rome rule. But virtually everybody, 99.9% of Catholics went to Mass and 99% of Protestants went to their churches. Do we know of these groups, you know, did they have any influence at all, or were they just like fringe? And also, were they attacked at all, or do we know whether they suffered any persecution for these atheist views?
Well, I guess what's interesting is that particularly, as I say, in the case of the Belfast Ethical Society, and interestingly, this is similar for some of the Welsh societies I've looked at as well. They were very closely aligned with the Independent Labour Party and that kind of socialist movement, and that almost seemed to be the kind of basically a big guiding principle of it. And I think they were seen generally as radicals and as quite dangerous radicals potentially, especially given that some of the other organisations they crossed over with, like the Belfast Radical Association and the Secular Society as well. So I think they were on the receiving end of some horror from other people. The ethical societies in general, as I say, they often had to defend themselves against charges of atheism. And what they were quite careful to do, and I think it was a calculated move, was to make it clear that it was fundamentally about separating the idea of morality from the idea of religion. And that obviously was challenging at the time. That was a challenging idea for lots of people. So there are, you know, in the newspapers at the time, there are some fairly shocked responses to different lectures and different events that they had. But I think it's what's part of, you know, what makes it so interesting is that they were out there expressing these ideas, seeming to get away with it for the most part.
That's the thing. I mean, most people wouldn't even know that they existed. I mean, when I was brought up in the Catholic faith, and, you know, even the priest would tell you, you know, the Protestants were bad, but an atheist was far worse than that. You know, that was the absolute worst thing you could ever be. So these people couldn't even admit openly to being, you know, I don't believe in a God whatsoever. I'm just ethical, but it's couched in more politic terms. Is that right?
Probably. I mean, I think from some of the bits we read over Maddie, there was also that element of, still at that time, things were tribal. I think there was a quote that sort of stated that they expected, and this is back in the 1930s, that somebody had quoted they expected 50% of the population isn't religious. They still have those tribal lines. And certainly some more of the census data you looked at, Maddie, showed lots of families identifying as different things, but what were the sort of things that they're identifying themselves as? There's different.
Yeah, looking at the censuses has been really interesting too. So as you say, they had, you know, there were people like these guys mentioned who were writing, you know, agnostic or atheist, and then various other things that they kind of chose to describe themselves as, everything from kind of militant suffragette to putting socialist as their religion, for example, or as we saw, kind of refusing it and things like that. But as you say, there's a great anecdote in what is now the New Humanist, but from the 1930s, where they're talking about how somebody said they were an agnostic and were asked by the census taker, yeah, but are you a Protestant agnostic or a Catholic agnostic? So yes, it was still very much bound up with those kind of divisions and identities.
And Maddie, you also told me about there was a really important event that happened here in Northern Ireland at one point. It was like a turning point for some of the scientific ideas. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, John Tyndall. I was wondering if I should should include this, but I wasn't sure how much time we'd have. But yeah, Professor John Tyndall gave the British Association lecture in Belfast in, I want to say it was 1874, and in that he essentially laid out kind of, well, argued for an evolutionary basis for morals and for kind of understanding the world, and it was seen as a real turning point, I suppose, in the scientific understanding of well, life, of how we live generally. And it's quoted regularly by rationalists and humanists from that point onwards as this kind of watershed moment. And there are some really good pieces actually online about Tyndall's address in Belfast to the Royal Society and its kind of impact and its ramifications and its controversial nature as well, because of course even scientists weren't, well, they were especially vulnerable in some ways to being criticised for expressing those ideas that could be seen to challenge traditional religious views, as we know. So,
I think it's just super interesting that so many sort of these remarkable these points happened here in our history. And I guess, you know, moving on, we're going to see sort of recent history items in the humanist heritage sort of calendar, or well, it's not way it's worked out like a calendar in some way, isn't it? So, I mean, I think we'll be able to mark things like humanist marriage, and I think I think that is our next subject this evening. So, Maddie, what I want to say is thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I think I can see in Tim's eyes he wants to speak to you more about that. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with you more on that about Northern Ireland. That was excellent. Yeah, so we're going to move on now this evening, and our next guest this evening is Laura Lacole, and with her actually this evening is also her lovely husband, Eunan O'Kane. Along with Laura and Eunan, we're also going to have Stewart Holden in the room with us. And Stewart is the CNSC, or sorry, he's our lead celebrant for Northern Ireland. And Laura and Eunan, if you're not aware, Laura and Eunan were the couple that took the very first case for us here in Northern Ireland. Tim, do you remember back 3 years ago we took that case?
I do, and it's amazing that, you know, even now, just a very quick anecdote. I'm going to about 5 weddings between now and Christmas, just because there's been a backlog. One of them is religious, one of them is in a church, and there are a couple of civil marriages, and there's a humanist one. This has been a really, really important move, and I think there's a societal change as well. Going back to what Maddie said there, you know, these people started the small acorn and the mighty oak tree. We think up to a third of people now may be non-religious, but Laura and Eunan's case is very, very important because they fought for the right to have not just a civil ceremony, and a civil ceremony here is completely non-religious, but it's very cold and it's non-religious, and they wanted a humanist wedding, which were allowed in Scotland and England, I think, at the time. Isn't that right, Laura?
In Ireland, we're still ahead of the curve when it comes to England.
We're ahead of the curve, not like us. Not like us. Before we start, Eunan, do you prefer playing in front of a flat back four and then in a hole before they, or what way do you?
No comment. Couldn't give away any secrets like that.
Listen, lovely to see you, and congratulations again. I'm probably the last person to congratulate you on your marriage, but tell us a wee bit about the case. It's stressful enough getting married, but you two went, listen, I tell you what, not only are we getting married, we demand a humanist wedding.
Yeah, it was super stressful, wasn't it? I mean, yeah.
Laura there was more than a few phone calls to me where there was hair being pulled out and things, because I was actually away.
You were in England?
I was away for a large part of what was going on.
Yeah,
so
it was me and Boyd in court, really. You were the substitute for Eunan. Yeah, we it wasn't until we started planning the wedding that we realised, you know, what the problem was with the humanist ceremonies in Northern Ireland. And once we started the planning process and we became aware of it, we just felt, listen, this is unfair. So it's going to affect our ceremony, and we knew that there's going to be plenty of other people in our position that affects them too. And we just thought, let's just challenge this head on with the support of Humanist UK, and let's see if we can get this sorted out in time for our wedding and hopefully make a difference for everyone thereafter. So there was no doubt in our mind that we were going to do it.
Yeah, it was for something that seemed like such a basic thing to be afforded to so many others and wasn't going to be afforded to us because of our belief, was just something that couldn't be left as it was and needed challenging. So good old us took up the fight.
It takes a lot of strength and guts to go, listen, I'm going to sue, I'm going to take this to court. How long did that process take? Was that a length?
It felt like a lifetime. I don't actually know how long, because
knowing us, it wasn't very long. We actually only got engaged a year before we got married, so it was all done in the space of a year. But I think, Boyd, you'll probably be more familiar with timeframes, but I think we were like a week out from our wedding, and we were still in a position where they had ruled in our favor, but there was an appeal going in, and we were like, well, what's happening? So it was all, there was a lot happening in that year.
It was super stressful. I wouldn't recommend, because I would recommend maybe getting like a wedding planner, because I was doing that. He was useless. Like I was planning the wedding and was at court and stuff. So looking back, it's a bit of a daze. There was plenty of tears. There was lots of stress. There was lots of tears in court, wasn't there, Boyd? You were a good support. But yeah, we would do it again, wouldn't we? Even though it was stressful.
The amount of people that have since reached out and said that we don't know, obviously through the powers of social media, that have said, you know, thank you so much for taking that. We wanted to have a humanist wedding and couldn't 10 years ago, or at the time it was like, we're going to have a humanist wedding, so we're going to hold off and see what the result of your case is. And obviously I from my knowledge, there's been an awful lot since. So Yeah, it's worked very well.
I must say, like, I mean, Laura, you taking the case, I mean, you're 100% the right person to take the case as well. I mean, Laura and I go back a little bit in terms of we've worked together on secular ideas and secular thought and trying to, forward different sort of secular ideas in Northern Ireland. And I can remember the day you called me to say, Boyd, I'm getting married, I'm looking for a celebrant. And I was like, I find you a celebrant if you want to take a court case. And it was like, you were in, I knew you were in for it. And it was excellent. I knew you were like, oh, I need to go and speak to Eunan and then I'll come back. But, tell us a little bit about that, Laura, about why it was deeply important to you, because I recognized it was important to you, that idea of it being legal. Tell us a bit more about that.
Again, it goes back to the unfairness thing. Ultimately, we didn't think that it was okay that so many other beliefs or religions were given this, let's call it a privilege, I don't know, and that we weren't. And for us, like, being humanist, like, believing this is the only life that we're going to live, like having a wedding is and committing yourself to one person is such a significant thing. Not that it's to other beliefs, but this is our only life, so like, it was a big decision for us. And we felt like that needed like the legal recognition, I suppose. It was such a significant thing.
Yeah, it didn't seem fair that we had to then go to a registry office on Monday just to sign a piece of paper and make it legal when others didn't. And
it sort of felt like it devalued the significance of it to us. And we knew that, like, we wouldn't be alone in that process, and the day is so important to you that you just want it to be right. And I didn't want to feel as though that it was just for show and there's no real weight to it. Do you know what I mean? So
I think the day was great as well. I mean, I must say it was an excellent wedding as well. That was some party you put on for that. And certainly
got the shots taken there, Boyd.
it was a great day. And moving on from that, I mean, Laura, that case was pivotal here in Northern Ireland for us. We've got Stewart here today. Stewart's been here from the beginning, from the get-go as well, the last 5 years with me, and Stewart's been really heavily involved in weddings and making sure that those grow here in Northern Ireland. Stewart, tell us a little bit about that, because I heard a new figure today that we are breaking another record for August. Do tell me.
We are breaking another record, and really Laura and Eunan were the start of it. I came on board doing ceremonies here in Northern Ireland, and I am in Northern Ireland, contrary to how my accent may suggest. Really that was the starting gun, because from there we started with tiny numbers. The word started to grow, started to get a bit of media publicity to say, yes, you can have a legal humanist wedding here. And just by month it's grown. Of course, we were set back by 2020, which put stoppers on a lot of things, but then we're more than making up for it this year. And we've just had the last couple of months have been insane for numbers of weddings, where we've done over 100 weddings in July and again over 100 more in August. And that really goes from a time when Laura and Eunan took their case. The first legal wedding here for the public, as it were, was only August 2018. So you're looking in the space of 3 years, really, 3 years and 1 week. We've gone from having maybe 1 or 2 in a month to having 100 in a month, and we're looking at probably 500, 600 weddings in Northern Ireland just this year, potentially even more next year. So Laura and Eunan, I can't thank you enough. It's been amazing what you did for us here, for other couples. It is, as even Tim was surprised to realise, we're ahead of England in this respect. I think we sat down at one point and tried to come up with a list of things that Northern Ireland had ever done ahead of England. We came up with the 5p charge on plastic bags, banning smoking in cars with children, and legal humanist weddings. We think that's it. That's the definitive list of things that Northern Ireland's ever done that's any more progressive than England. So you're in a very, very small list, but well done. And of course, with that comes the growth in other types of ceremonies as well, because we do funerals, and we do a lot of funerals, and we do baby naming ceremonies as well. And those have grown in popularity and recognition. Popularity perhaps is the wrong word to use for funerals, but what I mean is public acceptance of that and recognition that it's an option for people who haven't set foot in a church for 40 years, don't need to have a church funeral. There is an alternative available for them. And of course, the success of the weddings and the numbers of people going to ceremonies in Northern Ireland just drives that forward. We think there are probably going to be about 40,000 or maybe 50,000 people in Northern Ireland who will go to a humanist ceremony for the first time this year.
Wow. Yeah. That is phenomenal.
Huge numbers. Huge
A
numbers.
large amount of our wedding guests, it was actually their first experience of a humanist ceremony as well. And I don't know if you recall, but after the ceremony, whenever you sort of do the rounds around the tables, the feedback was like, wow, like that was amazing. I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, which for us was like, because I was brought up in a Catholic community, and most of my family are still practicing and knew on the other side of the fence effectively. So for a lot of them, we weren't sure how that would sit, or what would be said or anything else, but it was a resounding. We loved it. It was amazing, and from it actually a cousin of mine actually went on to then have a humanist ceremony. So it was good. And
there's no doubt.
Word of mouth is a huge factor, and we do still find that Eunan very much the case, that a lot of the guests will go into a wedding or a funeral, and you can see them sort of saying, what is this exactly? Think what kind of weird thing is this going to be? But then afterwards, their reaction is fantastic, and they say, "Gosh, I didn't know that you could have a ceremony like that. I didn't even know that was a thing. But actually, that was the nicest wedding I've ever been to." And even dare I say it, even people who come up and say, "Well, I'm actually very Christian in my beliefs, but that was a really lovely wedding," and that's in some ways especially pleasing to hear, really.
Yeah, that's the feedback that we received as well. Yeah.
I think it's excellent. I really do think that part of that work that happens through carrying out ceremonies also feeds into breaking down the fear of what humanism is, about us working together with other people and showing that, this is about us as a community living with one another in Northern Ireland. And I think it's just excellent. But we need to move on to our next group. So I'm going to say thank you so much, guys. Tim.
Thank you very much to Laura, and really, really appreciate what you've done, and almost forgive you for being a Glentoran fan, Laura. Well done.
And with that, I will move on to our next section. So part of the work that we do here in Northern Ireland is our public affairs work, and tonight I have Ruth Werman in the room with me, and she is our education campaigns manager. And Ruth and I have been working on a number of different bits and pieces around education in Northern Ireland. And I think maybe if we want to get Ruth just to give you a little bit of an overview of her work and how she feels about Northern Ireland, first of all. Ruth.
Thanks, Boyd. Well, I'm the Education Campaigns Manager for Humanist UK, and education has always been central to the work of Humanist UK. In fact, I think Andrew Copson started his role in the education position, and our current Director of Public Affairs and Policy also started in the education position. So it's always been the sort of fundamental role. And that's largely because we aim at securing autonomy and freedom of religion or belief for everyone. And that's only really going to be achievable if our education systems change quite dramatically from how they are now. So we work for an education system in which all schools have a pluralistic ethos, are open and accessible to children regardless of religion or belief background, and teach about religions and humanism in a broad, balanced and objective way. And because of its unique history, I guess, nowhere does that seem more important than in Northern Ireland. Although that unique history also means that the issues play out quite differently in Northern Ireland than they do in, say, England and Wales. So to give you a quick overview of Northern Ireland Humanists' work in education, I'll use the next few minutes to give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of what we think are the key problems and issues with the education system in Northern Ireland, and some of the things that are happening with respect to the Northern Ireland education system moving forward and the work that we've been doing there. So I guess if you talk to somebody who isn't from Northern Ireland, and possibly people who are in Northern Ireland as well, about what they think of when they think of the Northern Ireland education system, the first thing that would come up is the idea of segregation between the different religious communities. So that's not to say that elsewhere in the UK segregation isn't a problem, but I think there it's driven, for example, by religiously selective admissions policies in schools. But because of this kind of broader community division in Northern Ireland, that's not something that is so much a problem there. Essentially, they're sort of self-segregating without the need for such religious selection. However, that's not to say that there isn't strong support for integrated education. That's where children from a variety of backgrounds are educated together. I think usually they aim at something like 40% from Protestant backgrounds, 40% from Catholic backgrounds, and the further 20% from other backgrounds, although when you actually look at the stats, there's vastly more people from other backgrounds attending integrated schools. There's a real demand from, for example, the non-religious for integrated schools. And about 70% of parents, according to a recent poll, would like an integrated school for their children, but many can't access such a school because only 7% of the schools that there currently are in Northern Ireland do actually have an integrated ethos. So with that in mind, Northern Ireland Humanists really support the forthcoming integrated education bill, which recently passed its second stage in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and is looking to ensure that all new schools have integrated status, or that's the default assumption, that they will have integrated status. But that's not to say integrated schools as they're currently conceived are perfect. They still have a Christian ethos, and indeed Kelly Armstrong, who's the Alliance MLA behind the integrated education bill, has actually explicitly said during the debate for the second reading that nothing in that bill takes away from the Christian basis of all schools in Northern Ireland. Now, we can see as non-religious people, but also for people from minority faith backgrounds, this is really problematic. It's looking like, according to the latest Life and Times survey, that around a third of people, some 27%, now identify as non-religious, and that's roughly on a par actually with the percentage of people who identify as Catholics, for example, and yet they're not seeing themselves reflected in the school system at all. And that Christian ethos of Northern Ireland schools, including those which don't have a denominational religious character, i.e. controlled schools and integrated schools, it illustrates itself in a variety of different ways, and it means that the freedom of religion or belief of families in Northern Ireland and their school choice is really severely restricted. One area where it shows itself is in, for example, religious education. So the RE curriculum in schools in Northern Ireland is written by the four main churches, so the largest churches, and is almost entirely Christian in nature, and that's save for one module on world religions, and that appears in the secondary curriculum. So there's absolutely no coverage of any other religion or belief prior to that, or no requirement for it to be covered, and there's no requirement to teach about non-religious perspectives like humanism at all. So if your child goes to school and they're getting coverage of humanism, it's just luck that they've got a particularly enlightened teacher who wants to put that material on the curriculum. They don't have to cover it. Another area where it shows itself, and of course this is a problem in England and Wales as well, is that schools are required to carry out a daily act of collective worship. Now, strangely, in the case of Northern Ireland, it's not explicitly required by law to be Christian in nature, but it's invariably interpreted in that way because of the wider law, for example, around religious education. So invariably, it has a Christian character. Now, parents do have the option to withdraw their children both from collective worship and from RE, but there's no meaningful alternative provided, and the process can be difficult and isolating. Of course, it's not conducive to an inclusive school if your child has to be opted out of lessons with their peers in order to protect your freedom of religion or belief. And there's a forthcoming legal case which has just won permission to be heard in the High Court, and which will be being heard later this year, I think in November, where a parent and a child are actually taking the Department of Education and a school to court in order to challenge the laws around religious education and collective worship. Another area that's really problematic, I'm sorry, we went from really positive stuff about weddings to really negative stuff about education. I promise there is some positive stuff towards the end of this talk, is teacher employment and boards of governors. So as in England and Wales, schools in Northern Ireland have an exemption to equality law, and that means that they can employ, promote and remunerate teachers on the basis of their faith. As you would expect, this tends to mean that teachers with a Catholic background almost always work in Catholic schools, and teachers with a Protestant background almost always work in controlled schools, with a handful kind of turning up in integrated schools as well. And that means that the cycle of segregation between children in different sorts of schools continues, because children aren't exposed to those from different backgrounds either as pupils or teachers. And then if they themselves decide that they want to be a teacher, the teacher training institutions are similarly segregated. And also there's a requirement for all primary teachers and secondary school leaders and teachers of RE in Catholic schools to have something called the Catholic Certificate in RE. And that also helps to cement the segregation, makes it difficult if you've trained in certain teacher training institutes to move over the community divide. And then the problem's further exacerbated by the rules around boards of governors. So they're required to appoint faith representatives, and they often look to employ those who share the same faith. And in some circumstances are actually appointed purely for their faith affiliation rather than their ability to carry out their duties. And this can go pretty badly wrong, as we'll see in the next section that I'll talk about, which is relationships and sex education. So of course this is a really vital part of children's education, and in terms of introducing statutory relationships and sex education, Northern Ireland was ahead of the curve. They've had it since 2007. However, because it has to be taught in line with the ethos of the school and often leaves out or distorts important aspects of the curriculum, especially content on LGBT inclusion, abortion, contraception, so all of those issues where religion may well step in and kind of shape people's attitudes in a non-objective way, that can be really problematic. And one area where we saw the problem of faith-based governors and the problem of relationships and sex education having to be taught in line with the ethos of the school happened at a primary school in Calinchi this year that Boyd and I were working with, where a church appointed governor was able to actually entirely block the teaching of RSE on the basis that he believed that lessons which were on pretty basic stuff like puberty, naming body parts and personal hygiene were not in line with the teachings of the church. So parents there were unable to get RSE for their children because a faith appointed governor just blocked it. Now that situation has now been resolved, but it just shows how these problems kind of weave in together to make the education system really not conducive to kind of the pluralistic, objective vision that we have in mind. So from all this, I think it's clear to see that Northern Ireland does have a long way to go in terms of securing that education system, that pluralistic, inclusive education system. But there are some positive changes happening. I don't want to leave you on a kind of negative note. So one, I've already mentioned the Integrated Education Bill. It might be the case that the bill isn't perfect, or the integrated education as currently conceived isn't perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction to have children from different backgrounds all educated alongside one another. And if we move there, we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So we will definitely be supporting that bill, and also trying to work with various MLAs to try and kind of address the issue of all schools still having a Christian ethos. There's also a private members bill going to be tabled by Chris Little, who heads up Stormont's education committee, to remove the teacher exemption to equality law. And there's real cross-party support for this. So everyone seems to be on board that it's important that that particular exemption is put to bed. The Department of Education has also recently commissioned an independent review of education that's going to look specifically at securing what they're calling a single system of education, or thinking about what that means. And there are lots of positive noises, again, cross-party, for supporting that. Of course, the devil's going to be in the detail. From talking to different people kind of across the political spectrum, I think it's clear, Boyd, that different people have different views of what a single system of education will look like. But I think, again, it's a definite step in the right direction. And something that we personally have got in the works is a guide for non-religious parents on the current laws in Northern Ireland and how to manage issues to do with religion and belief and education. And we're hoping to launch that later this year. And we think that should be really helpful to all the parents who are facing issues with their children's schools in Northern Ireland. So yes, there's a lot that needs to change, but there's a lot of positive stuff happening.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. And you're right. There's an awful lot happening around education. In actual fact, not just an awful lot happening with us in education, but the government moving forward on things. And I think it's going to be really important just for me to point out to our audience here tonight about your involvement in that. You know, we are going to be doing calls to action in the future. It's going to be important that you support those who do. Keep an eye out for emails that come through that are asking you for those support, because the more we can get in front of MLAs and the more that we can sort of put pressure on to really do have an inclusive education system here in Northern Ireland, I think is really important. And I believe that everybody here, all of our members and supporters, can help with that. Tim, what are your thoughts on this? I'm sure you have some questions, because you're in the integrated education here in Northern Ireland as well.
I do a lot of work for the integrated, gigs for the Integrated Education Fund, and integrated education is different from secular education. You're absolutely right. So Ruth, there's in some senses the situation is even worse than you say. We have a situation where we educate our teachers separately. So we literally have a Catholic education college and a Protestant education college. In primary schools, we have segregated trade unions. Catholic teachers all are members of the INTO, the Irish National Teachers Organisation. Protestants tend to be members of the Ulster Teachers Union. In some senses, it's even worse. On the positive side, you're right. I work for the Integrated Education Fund. Only 7% of children go to integrated schools, but that is changing. There is a bigger demand. And the campaign that they have launched, the Integrate Our School, which is basically grassroots democracy, where they say to parents, listen, if you want to save a school, do you want to go integrated? And they've had 3 or 4 of these sort of referendums in some quite surprising areas, given the sectarian geography of Northern Ireland. And there's the first Catholic school has gone integrated recently. A Protestant school in a very hardline Protestant area has gone integrated. Things are changing. I think parents are they're leveling up from the bottom up, which is great. Now, that's not a secular education system, that's an integrated education, but I think they slightly go hand in hand. I think you're right. We need to desegregate. We've a very divided society. Housing is divided. Politics is completely divided. Education seems to me fundamental at the basis of it. Unless we desegregate our schools as soon as possible. And you go back to what Maddie said in 1969. That was one of the first demands of the humanists in those days. We need to integrate our schools. And there is progress. It isn't, but it is quite gloomy sometimes. But there is progress from the ground up.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny you mentioned that, Tim. That's one of the Catholic school that I believe went through that Integrate My School process comes into play tomorrow. It's tomorrow that fully goes integrated. So it is really good to see. And certainly, over the last 5 years, we've been working with a number of different people, again, from minority faith positions, from Queen's, from Ulster University, from Stranmillis. And over those 5 years, we've come together, and now I think we're ready to launch this coalition, which also includes the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education, includes Northern Ireland Council for Racial Equality, the Interfaith Forum, and I think that's going to be a stepping stone for us all to be able to come together, and as well as a coalition of people of faith and none, to say, look, we need to see a positive change here in Northern Ireland. And I think Ruth and I will be working on that very hard over the next few years, again, with the review of education. I mean, any change to education in Northern Ireland isn't something that's going to happen over a couple of years. It's just, you know, undoubtedly I will be retiring and still we will be going through some of these questions, but hopefully we'll be much further down the line. And Ruth, I really look forward to working over the next number of years in these things with you. And yeah, there are other things that we can move on to that are also positive and that are moving forward. Our education work is moving forward, but we've also been doing some work in Northern Ireland around freedom of speech and blasphemy laws. And I would like to thank Ruth again. Thank you for this evening. And I'm going to invite Rachel Taggart-Ryan into the room. So Rachel's one of our campaign managers for Humanist UK and has worked a lot on blasphemy reform all over. And I think, yeah, if we kick off, Rachel, if you just want to give us an idea of what you work on and what you do.
Okay, so I'm afraid going from humanist marriage to education, we're now going to go to the very negative, which is blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland. So blasphemy exists as both a common law offence in Northern Ireland and also in 4 separate pieces of legislation. But before I go into the situation in Northern Ireland, I really want to sort of start off by saying why having laws that restrict blasphemous content is a problem. And this is when we're going to go into the very negative. Okay, so I'm going to kick off by saying there are 13 countries in the world where blasphemy or apostasy is punishable by death, and in a further 47, people can be imprisoned. Now, most religions actually, almost exclusively, have some form of prohibition against blasphemy. And this means prohibiting words or deeds that denigrate or show a lack of reverence towards either a deity, a religious belief, or a sacred object. Now, one argument that occasionally is advanced towards us in defense of criminalizing blasphemy is to say, well, doesn't that protect people's beliefs? Isn't that a good thing because it protects vulnerable groups from being offended or having particular important aspects of their belief system criticized or mocked or in any way hurt? But in the reality, it is the very opposite which is the case. So laws that penalize blasphemy are essentially a violation of the right to freedom of expression, and they are used around the world, and particularly in those 13 countries where you can be executed for holding beliefs similar to what we do and for expressing them. These laws are particularly used as a mechanism, as a means of harassing, victimizing, and discriminating against religion and belief minorities. Therefore, they are also not only a violation of freedom of expression, as we have in international law, but also freedom of religion and belief as well. They are really one of the biggest means in those countries of perpetuating the majority belief groups and to marginalize, harass, and victimize those from minority groups. Now, as part of my role at Humanist UK, I work supporting non-religious, humanist and atheist asylum seekers who come to this country. And they are fleeing their home nations because they have been accused of blasphemy or have been outed as non-religious, and they face prosecution or communal violence as a result of that. So the 2 biggest countries where we get asylum applicants coming from, non-religious asylum applicants, are Pakistan and Bangladesh. And I'm just going to use these 2 examples just to illustrate exactly why blasphemy laws are a problem. So Pakistan's blasphemy code has received a lot of media attention over the last couple of years, and mostly because of the case of a Christian woman called Aziza Bibi, who actually received asylum in Canada after being acquitted. And I say that she was acquitted after 10 years on death row of being accused of blasphemy, of having denigrated the Prophet Muhammad. So it is quite clear in her case, and she illustrates it quite well, as from a Christian minority in Pakistan, that blasphemy laws were used as a way of repressing non-Muslim religious minorities. But also, on the other hand, they are also used in Pakistan as a mechanisms of enacting personal vendettas. And this is possible because under Pakistan's penal code, no evidence is actually required to substantiate a blasphemy charge, and no evidence needs to be presented in court that the actual words were said or written for a death sentence to be handed down. So an accusation can lead you all the way through the system up until a death sentence being handed down. And that is indeed what actually happened in the case of Aziz Bibi, who illustrates this very well. So in this case, you can see kind of two parallel purposes that is being used. It's restricting what people can say, how they can act, and how they can respond to a religious belief system or a sacred object, essentially keeping that minority group from fulfilling their own expressions of their religion or belief. This obviously affects humanists. We are a particularly vulnerable minority, often an invisible minority in Pakistan. For example, in April 2017, Marcel Khan, who was a student who referred to himself as a humanist in his bio on Facebook, was murdered by being shot, beaten with sticks by fellow students. Around about 50 people were involved in the attack that murdered him, and police were actually present on the campus but refused to intervene. And interestingly, the governor of the particular region in Pakistan refused to comment on the murder until it was established that Marshal Khan was actually innocent of blasphemy. He refused to condemn a murder of someone who was deemed to have committed blasphemy. So you can see the two parallels here. We have political repression, but also having those laws in the statute book justifies and gives rise to acts of communal violence against those minorities as well. So you have state-sponsored persecution, but also the threat of communal violence approaching. The situation is very similar in Bangladesh, which constitutionally was a very secular state and protected the rights of freedom of religion or belief. However, this changed in 2011 when Islam was established as the state religion, and a new blasphemy law essentially was added to the statute books at that time. Since that time, we have seen a marked increase in attacks on religious minorities, and then within that, the non-religious. So it very much culminated in 2013 when various non-humanist bloggers called for essentially the prosecution of various war criminals who are part of the Jamaat al-Islami, who are a Islamic fundamentalist political party in Bangladesh. And they had connections to certain crimes that had been committed during the War of Liberation. As part of these protests, there was a backlash against humanist writers, which led to over 100,000 people taking to the streets of Dhaka, calling for the death of atheist bloggers. The protesters specifically had a hit list and called for the arrest of 84 named atheists, 4 of whom were then later detained by the government and charged. And since those protests back in 2013, there has been around 20 targeted brutal murders of humanists, mostly with machetes and guns. And in fact, it has moved on, this persecution, not only to those atheists who were accused of blasphemy on that original list of 84, but really to anybody expressing what is deemed to be secular or blasphemous content in its entirety. So like I'm saying, having these laws on the statute book are a real problem. Now, in Northern Ireland, although it exists in common law and there are 4 pieces of statute where you can actually be fined or go to prison for committing blasphemy, there has not been a prosecution in recent decades. However, there is a direct connection between Western countries such as the United Kingdom and our constituent parts maintaining these laws on their rule book, and the justification of countries that have these very repressive laws. I'll give you one example of this. So about 5 years ago at the 13th session of the Human Rights Council, a motion was put forward by the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which is essentially a grouping of Islamic states within the United Nations. And they were basically in response to certain blasphemous content, the Danish cartoons, for example, were trying to put forward a motion that there ought to be international restrictions against blasphemy, that it ought to have extrajudicial prosecution. This is a very dangerous thing for freedom of religion or belief, and a very dangerous thing for freedom of expression. Now, the wording of this motion, which actually was put forward by Pakistan, took its wording directly from the Republic of Ireland's constitutional blasphemy laws, which have now been repealed. So we can see that there is a direct link between having these laws in our statute books and the harm they are causing in these brutal regimes. The then Special Rapporteur, UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, at the time quoted that those countries that continue to have an intimidating blasphemy practice like to quote European countries to unmask Western hypocrisy. So what he's saying here is, we were very much unable to call out or have an effective international voice on blasphemy restrictions and the repression that they were causing, because we had these on our own statute books, and these were Christian-only blasphemy laws. So we can see that there is a direct link between the two. So where do we go from here in terms of campaigning for it? What practical steps can we take in order to, to campaign against the brutality that we are seeing caused by blasphemy and caused by religious fundamentalism? So Humanist UK is one of the founding members of the End Blasphemy Law campaign, which is an international coalition of different humanist and free speech organisations, which was founded in 2015. And since then, we were focused on repealing blasphemy laws across the world wherever they appeared on statute books. And since 2015, 10 countries have abolished their blasphemy laws, including Scotland earlier this year. Spain currently also has a bill before their legislature, so we're hoping to add Spain as the 11th, hopefully later this year. We're seeing how that goes. Spanish politics is a bit volatile at the moment, so we'll see how successful that is. And also Humanist UK was one of the leading organisations that led to the repeal of blasphemy laws in England and Wales, which was back in 2009. And one of the main reasons for that, and if you come across the debates that were put forward at the time as to why these laws on our books were a problem, they were not dead nor archaic laws, they were actually having a real world impact, is that we were not being able to say anything about Pakistan. We were not being able to say anything about Bangladesh, and we were not able to say anything about what was happening in Iran. Or Saudi Arabia. And this was a real problem for our diplomacy and for our effectiveness in the world as a human rights advocate. So the laws that exist in Northern Ireland are actually the same laws, the same pieces of legislation that were repealed in England and Wales over a decade ago. Although there's not been a prosecution in over a century in Northern Ireland, those same laws were active in England and Wales. Prosecutions were attempted to go ahead right up until repeal in the 21st century. Repeal actually came about in England and Wales, and the final impetus was an attempted prosecution of the BBC for daring to broadcast Jerry Springer the musical, which some viewers deemed to be offensive. So it was about 2 years ago now that we decided that this was very much unfinished business. Our sister organisation, Human Society Scotland, had a very successful campaign, as I've said, that came to a culmination earlier this year to repeal common law offence of blasphemy in Northern Ireland and Scotland, but there remained these things in Northern Ireland. So in 2019, we launched a campaign to repeal Northern Ireland's blasphemy laws, encouraging our members and supporters to contact their MLAs. And we have been very successful. So over 1,000 emails have been sent so far. And as a direct result of our members and supporters getting involved in this as grassroots campaigners, we can confirm that Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the Alliance Party, the Green Party, People Before Profit are all committed to repealing Northern Ireland's blasphemy laws. The Ulster Unionist Party are on the whole supportive, but don't have an official party position, but most of their MLAs will have confirmed that they will indeed vote in favour of repeal. So that leaves the only party in Northern Ireland, substantial party in opposition to this, is the Democratic Unionists. But then again, they are not a united front on this. Me and Boyd have had many great and surprising conversations with DUP MLAs who are not following the party line and have been a great help to us in getting forward with this plan. But I think our greatest success has probably come earlier this year, where me and Boyd have been able to speak to both the Justice Minister and the Finance Minister, who, when we spoke to them, was Naomi Long and Conor Murphy, who confirmed that in their positions as the two ministers with responsibility in their portfolios for criminal law and blasphemy specifically, that they wished to support this campaign and they wished to bring legislation forward. Now, it's all just now, I'm hoping, a matter of time. It's a matter of getting a vehicle before Stormont, getting a bill which we can actually just put forward to the vote. We think we have the numbers in terms of MLAs to vote for us. And so I'm not going to make a promise to Northern Ireland Humanists, but I would hope that I could come back here at the end of 2022 and say that there are no longer blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's been an amazing campaign, and Rachel, thank you for that very in-depth report on blasphemy around the world and here in Northern Ireland. And it has been a really interesting campaign because, in actual fact, the catalyst for it, even though we knew that we wanted to ban blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, was actually a DUP member, DUP MLA, who said, "Look, I think that there is a chance here for you to move this across Stormont." So it's been really interesting, I think, just in terms of the political engagement here in Northern Ireland as well. You know, you're surprised all the time by how you tackle these things. And Rachel, we're gonna have to move on. We're not even going to be able to get to ask any questions because we need to move on to your next section. And I know Tim will want to speak to your next person as well. And I think Tim would probably want to speak to you about blasphemy laws in Northern Ireland, I'm sure, as well. So we'll have to put on something else and bring you along and make sure more people in Northern Ireland get to hear what you're saying. So thank you very much for that, Rachel. And I'd like to bring in next onto the screen Pippa Swan. And I need to just say, first of all, that we were expecting tonight to have Ciarán McWilliams on with us, but Ciarán is actually quite ill at the minute. But Ciarán's partner in crime, for want of a better word, his partner in crime in McGabry prison is Pippa Swan. And Pippa has been in McGabry now for the last couple of years. Although it's been quite difficult, I think, more recently because of COVID getting in there. And more recently, though, because of the great work that Ciarán and Pippa have been doing in McGabry, there are avenues there for us to expand, and we're in quite high-level conversations now with the Department of Justice on our non-religious pastoral care within the prison. But I really thought it would be interesting to have Pippa on here tonight to talk a little bit about personally about what she feels, how she feels about working in the prison and the stuff that she does as a pastoral care volunteer. But also, interestingly, and Tim, I'm sure you might want to ask Pippa about this, Pippa is the only person, at least that I know in Ireland, who is training on the Humanist Master's course. So we'll maybe pickle your head a little bit about that as well. So Pippa, please do tell us a little bit about your journey with McGabry and what it's been like for you.
Well, it certainly has been quite a journey. I was thinking when I was coming on here how I would explain how I ended up there, and I suppose it was sort of a bit of a midlife crisis, really. I saw an advert from probably even you, Boyd, I don't know, in Facebook, wanting volunteers to go into McGabry prison, and I just thought, well, that sounds completely different from what I normally do. So I signed up, and I'm not quite sure exactly how it happened that it was Ciarán and I that ended up, out of all those volunteers, being the two that, you know, turned up for our first session there, and I mean, it was, when I look back now, it was quite funny because Ciarán and I mean, Ciarán's a big rugby player, as anyone that knows Ciarán knows. I mean, he's quite, you know, he looks quite substantial. And I was really glad that I had Ciarán with me because I was feeling extremely small and extremely female. And we were sticking together like glue. I mean, we weren't holding hands, but we were shoulder to shoulder because the idea of walking around a prison, I mean, initially I couldn't quite believe, I think in my head, I thought we'd be in like some little safe room somewhere and they would waft prisoners into us and it would all be terribly secure. But actually, once we'd had a wee bit of an introduction, they basically gave us our passes and said, right, there you go. There's the prison. And we were in the unusual situation because most humanist chaplains in England would be part of the chaplaincy. But for reasons obviously that I won't go into, the chaplaincy don't really want us. So we were kind of parachuted in to be our own little unit, which is both a blessing and a curse, because it means that other people can be kept at arm's length by the chaplaincy. Chaplains can say to them, right, well, we don't need you today, we don't want you, there's no humanists or whatever. But the chaplains can't stop us coming in, but equally it means that we don't have an office, we were really just asking people all the way, like, how do we do this? How do we get here? Who are these people? What, you know, so we were just finding our way and we had to find our own people. So that was quite intimidating, just, you know, introducing ourselves to people in the wing, hoping that prison officers were nice to us, which they nearly all were. I say nearly all, in fact, they all were.
You really did find your own people, but didn't you? I mean, you did.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I can't, you know, we were trained to use the computer system. So we didn't upset people. We just restricted ourselves to people who identify themselves as non-religious. They're called nils in the prison, so nil religion. And we would print off who had come in that previous week and go and find them and say, you know, how are you doing? And, you know, would you like us to come and find you next week? And we were there for half a day a week. And it was just, you know, at times it was sort of overwhelming because there was just so many people to see. And it was, you know, some people we'd see for several weeks or months, and then other people we would only see once or twice. And it was amazing how quickly I actually got, you know, to the point where, I mean, there was, you know, some stretches of time where it was only me going in, and I surprised myself walking around the prison, and I felt quite safe. I felt quite, you know, okay. So it's been, you know, really surprisingly rewarding, you know, as I say, for something that started just as a bit of a, I don't know, as I say, a bit of a midlife crisis, probably, of thinking, right, I'll do something different with my life. So yeah, it's been good. And obviously until COVID came along and spoilt it all. I mean, so we haven't been allowed in.
You really have been instrumental in it, but Pippa, I mean, I know you and I and Ciarán and Claire, who's our lead for pastoral care over in the London office as well, have been in contact quite a bit to move on and try and think about how we develop that work in the prisons. And I know Ciarán and yourself and I have spoken about, you know, what that looks like. Groups, you know, can we do groups of prisoners at some point, and, you know, bringing more volunteers in there and then widening it out to the other prisons, including both the youth and female prison as well. Tim, what do you think about the work Pip is doing in McGarry prison?
Well, I think you made a big mistake answering anything from you. Never catch you voice. That's a mistake. It happened to me 5 years ago. Now look at me. I think it's fantastic, Pip, and it's really, really good work. I just wanted to ask him, how many, do you have a percentage of prisoners who would come to you, or do they just come to chat about life or whatever, or do they come to you at moments of distress? What sort of services are you providing for them?
I think it's around about the same as the population out of the prisons. It was around about 11%.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of surprising things. You know, so many people are on remand. I mean, I knew sort of vaguely that lots of people in prison are on remand, but there's so many people on remand, and it really is varied. Sometimes it's surprising how easy it is to find yourself in prison. You know, terribly middle class, and I had sort of thought, my goodness, you know, prison is the last place anyone would end up, and actually it's surprisingly easy to find yourself in prison. This was a big surprise to me. And also the kind of, you know, some people are, you know, boys really. I mean, obviously they're not boys because they're in an adult prison, but you know, that's my sort of experience of them, is that they're just young men who are, you know, rather broken and, you know, have all sorts of problems.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I was going to say, presumably there are problems like lack of education, drug use.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I'm the mother of sons, so I think there's a little bit of me that, I mean, not that I want, you know, I don't want to be their mother, but I just mean you kind of think this is someone's child, you know, and some people have got lots of mental health problems and problems with drugs, and you don't spend very long talking to a lot of them, and they've lost, you know, they've lost parents, or, you know, they've just had really, you know, difficult, you know, times. And then there's the thing that surprised me is older people, you know, older men who have just, you know, found themselves there, and it's probably not their first time in prison, and you know, they've maybe lost contact with children, they've lost contact with family, and you know, just very lonely. And you know, that sort of sad experience where for some of them actually being in prison is better than being out, you know, because they actually have structure, they have company, they have routine, they have, you know, there's in some ways there's not much to worry about in prison, whereas for some of them they're really, you know, they're really lonely. So for some of them, you know, they are in crisis, or they're having terrible mental health problems, or you know, drug addiction. And then others, it's just literally someone to have a conversation with. You know, it struck me quite early on when a prisoner made the remark to me that I think he'd been in there 3 or 4 weeks, and he said, this is the first time I've actually had a conversation with somebody that's just a conversation, you know, as opposed to someone getting information, giving information, you know, asking me stuff. You know, this is just a conversation. And it sort of struck me that for a lot of people, you know, so you can talk about incredibly mundane stuff, you know, really mundane stuff, and then other times, you know, I mean, I was always worried in case they would talk about their crime or something, and what would I say? But I have to say, hardly anyone's spoken about their crime. A couple of people, but generally they want to talk about, you know, what's going on for them, or, as I say, just have a conversation.
And are you getting to the point now where instead of you going out and saying, hello, I'm available, that people are now coming to you, are they? And
well, we were starting to, and that's the frustration of, you know, COVID happening, is we were starting to get a few referrals from people, and yes, we were sort of getting slightly, it was that slight tension of like, well, we have to let maybe some people go because there's new people coming along. But COVID, I've kept, you know, I've seen a few people on Zoom, but the problem is that because the chaplains keep going in, you know, they have to be there for, you know, the legal reasons, the chaplains have to be there. And it's very hard to start you know, when someone's in crisis, it's very hard to start something on Zoom. You know, you need to really be face to face with someone and introduce yourself and start that conversation.
But do you have the same status then as a Christian chaplain?
No, because we're volunteers. So the chaplains have to be there because I don't know, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but they have to be seen by a chaplain within 24, 48 hours of arriving in a prison. I think it's something left over from, you know, Victorian times. So they were allowed to keep going in, and all volunteers were stopped, and they're still not in the prison.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, certainly, I mean, my area of work when it comes to our pastoral care work is really looking to try and get us access into these institutions, whether it's the prisons or the hospitals. And certainly, as Pippa said earlier about, you know, the prison population is really identical to the last census in terms of it was like 10.5 or 11% of people who are identifying as non-religious in there, which at that point, I think 5 years ago, when we were looking at it, was around about 90 people. And the prison population is about 900 people at the time. And it is interesting what Pip is saying there as well, because, you know, during this time that COVID has happened, you know, the chaplains and those religious chaplains have been able to still access the prison, have been able to give that contact to religious prisoners, and yes, they do say that they're also there for the non-religious, but we know, you know, from the evidence gathered and from other research that non-religious people want to speak to non-religious people when it comes to that connection and that chat. And so it's a little bit frustrating that we're in the situation that we are in terms of, you know, our humanist volunteers can't get in there as well, but the prison are working with us as best possible. I would like to say at the minute, you know, we do have good relations with them. Things have been moving forward, and we hope to see more movement with them. And I think that's really good. And I think, yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit, Pippa, on your masters. Tell us a little bit about that, because that does sound really exciting. And I know you've told me that you've found it really interesting.
Yeah, no, I've loved doing it. I think because when I heard about the MA and I was doing this work, I think I'm sort of from a professional background. So I think I always like to be qualified at stuff. If there's a course going, I think I'll probably take it. So, but I've loved it. It's been really, it's 2-year course and I've done the first year. So it's got I mean, I still can't say the title of it really with a straight face, because it just sounds really pretentious to me. It's just an MA in existential and humanist pastoral care, which just sounds really up its own arse. But it's been really, you know, philosophy and sociology and psychology and, you know, worldviews. And I found myself writing an essay about Ian Paisley and his worldview. And I've done, you know, things about existential approaches to anxiety and, you know, all sorts of things. Really, really interesting, you know, stuff. Just, I think one of the biggest takeaways is actually kind of opening up your mind. And, you know, there's some definition of wisdom that I'm not very good at quoting, but, you know, how wisdom is, you know, unlearning. And in a way, when you do sort of philosophy and all these kind of things, it's almost, you know, this idea of unlearning some of the stuff that you thought you knew and took for granted, and questioning, well, why do I think that? Which I suppose is like the humanist point of view. It's kind of, well, you know, it's thinking and rationalizing and, you know, I think this is right, but why do I think it's right? And am I right in thinking that, and all that, you know, that kind of process. So
yeah.
I'm just going to start starting the second year now.
That sounds.
And thank you very much for what you do. Boyd, is it the situation that we're trying to get to the situation where humanist pastoral care is on the same status as religious pastoral care in hospitals and schools?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, if you look at the rest of the UK, especially England and Wales, I mean, the pastoral care teams are doing so well, especially in the likes of the NHS. You know, we have people who are now employed who are leading departments. You know, so they would be like pastoral care leads or lead chaplain within their hospitals. And obviously here in Northern Ireland, it's going to take a little bit longer to do that. It's still a little bit of work to happen there, but it's slowly but surely starting to happen, you know, at least in some areas. I mean, even within the chaplaincy, within the hospitals, we do have a couple of good contacts there, and we are going to keep on moving through that. At the minute, though, we you know, when we started doing this, we wanted to go and meet with the chaplains and try and move forward that way. And when you hit the challenges, or when you hit the barricade of being blocked from doing something, you just have to make the next step up. So at the minute, we are actually in talks with Department of Health and looking at the department in order to make sure that equality legislation is adhered to, and that there is equality for all, and that includes non-religious patients in hospitals.
But I think we can count this as a progressive thing. We've done better where we are 5 years ago. Where we are 5 years ago, yes, and where we are now is completely different.
Oh, 100%. I mean, where we've got to in the last 5 years in terms of pastoral care in the prisons is excellent. I mean, I just think that, you know, it's what Pippa and Ciarán have done is amazing. And I mean, you know, I know that the last year has been really frustrating for them, but I also think that both of them are really aware that as soon as the prison opens back up again, there is a load of work to do there, and we're in a really good place to start moving ahead with it. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. I'm really confident that we're going in the right direction. And Pippa, we're going to shoot on or move on a bit here. And thank you very much for coming in and standing for Ciarán, and I will be speaking to you soon. So everybody, I would just like to, we're going to start to try and round up the evening, and in doing so, there are a number of other people that I'd really like to introduce you to this evening. And the first two that I'm going to bring onto the screen are Kat Kerr and Karen Gibson. And Kat and Karen are our LGBT lead and LGBT sort of assistant in Northern Ireland. And Kat, give us a little bit about what you're doing. Give us a couple of minutes so as people know.
Yeah, hi everyone. I was the local LGBT humanist lead for around the past 3 years, during which time I set up social events and attendance of pride parades across the country and tried to make sure that the non-religious had a voice in conversations surrounding LGBT liberation. I now primarily focus on UK white LGBT events, but alongside Boyd, Rachel, and our volunteer Karen, I continue to support our campaign to ban conversion therapy in Northern Ireland. I sit on the Ban Conversion Therapy and I Coalition, which has been making immense progress engaging with our government on an upcoming ban. As always, in our wee country, things aren't moving along as quickly as we would like, but we have built a good relationship with the current Minister of Communities, who has shown to be very open to our input and has been very supportive of a ban. Karen has taken on the role of LGBT lead, so I will hand over to her from here.
Hi, Karen. So Karen, in Northern Ireland, I know that the last year has been really difficult with like sort of organising in-face events and stuff like that, but that is what we're sort of thinking about for next year, and you're going to also help me with our memorandum of understanding as well, aren't you? So.
Aye, that's it. Yeah, the last year has been a bit of a tricky one to start. So as Kat says, yeah, it was nearly a year ago exactly now. I started volunteering as event support with her. So I had my first event then in December, which was the conversation with Christian Nairn. So he was our latest NI patron at that point. So we chatted with him about being a humanist, growing up in Northern Ireland, his film and TV experiences and all that fun stuff. It was a really good event. And yeah, it's something that we'd love to be able to do again soon, ideally this time around, something in person. So yeah, we're hoping to get an NI sort of LGBT social event together soon. And as you say, then, yeah, as well as that, we're working on the Memorandum of Understanding against conversion therapy. So that's alongside a few other organisations with the hope that we can get the Northern Ireland Health Trust to sign up to that, which will mean they essentially confirm that they stand against conversion therapy and acknowledge the harm that it inflicts on people who are either forced or coerced into taking it. So there's a lot of work going into that at the moment, and fingers crossed we'll be successful.
Indeed. Karen, Kat, thank you very much for all of your hard work. I must say, Karen and Kat and myself, we sit on 3 coalitions. One of them, 2 of those coalitions don't have anybody else from Northern Ireland on them, a UK-wide one and a Memorandum of Understanding. And the Northern Ireland coalition that, Northern Ireland Humanists would have been one of those founding members of the Ban Conversion Therapy Northern Ireland. We did a call to action from that and had 25,000 emails sent to MLAs over a matter of 3 or 4 days. And on that, as you may well not know, that sort of led to the downfall of Arlene Foster, and then into, who did we have? You feel
guilty. Hope you feel guilty.
I don't know. I mean, I felt guilty when Edwin Poots came in, and then I don't know if I feel like guilty anymore. I just don't know how I feel about the whole situation. But it was very interesting, and it was so good to see how quickly support was galvanized for that campaign, and it was so good to see how much support actually came from MLAs as well in that campaign. And it's just something that needs to end. Conversion therapy in all its forms is wrong. It's just incredibly harmful, and we can't wait to see a ban from it. And I know that both of you will be passionately working with me on that, and I really appreciate it, guys. Right, let's move on to our next couple of people who are on our big team as well. So we do an awful lot of education work in Northern Ireland, and we have Laura Fitzsimmons and also Callum Irvine. On the screen, so our Understanding Humanism work is really about education work and how we can engage with teachers and pupils in schools. And obviously, again, we have had a year of COVID, so that has been difficult going in the schools. But Laura, tell us a little bit about some of the things that we have been doing, including the training for teachers.
Okay, so Boyd, I'm going to correct you and say that my name is Laura Fitzsimmons, and that is a distinction I've been making my whole 37 years, and I'm not going to stop now. I'm Laura Fitzsimmons, and I am the lead volunteer for school speaking in Northern Ireland. I'm also a wedding celebrant, and I hold lots of other voluntary roles with Humanists UK and Northern Ireland Humanists. And this evening has been a really good reminder of why it's so important to volunteer and be involved, because in the last 5 years we have made so many changes. There's so many more changes to come, and it's amazing to be a part of it. So volunteer, it's a good thing to do, and we always need your help. School speaking, yes, we have been really pleased this year that we were able to host some teacher training for the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education. We held a little training session for teachers, and it was really refreshing to hear that they thought that this was a brilliant thing to introduce into schools. I think we're all, I don't want to say victims, but we are all victims of our own education here in Northern Ireland, and that we're either educated as Catholics or we're educated as Protestants, and there's not really a lot else to it. So any opportunity to broaden our children's horizons and show them that there's more to life than being a Catholic or a Protestant is a really good thing. And it's been lovely to have so many people, so many teachers wanting to get on board with that. So we would love to train more teachers. We've got some excellent resources, excellent materials, and excellent trainers. So if you work in a school, or if you know someone who works in a school, please do put the word out to them and let them know that we're here, and we'd love to get involved and stretch everybody's minds just a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And Callum, you've come on now over the last number of months to support Laura. Maybe you want to let everybody know that, you know, how we're going to kick off this new term.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Callum Irvin. I'm volunteering here to try and get our humanist speakers into schools. And the way I see it, sort of Ruth set out earlier really well, and all the issues that we have in our education here. And I like to think that I'm trying in my sort of small way to try and start making some positive change towards that. So I'm involved contacting schools to make them aware of the humanist speakers that we have, who can come in and work with them in their schools. And they're willing to do that in a really flexible way. They can do it by assemblies to whole schools, to year groups, working with smaller groups in classes or subjects, being involved in debates with students, but whatever needs we can meet in the school to get our speakers there to promote the awareness of humanism amongst teachers, amongst the students, just to promote the idea of equality, tolerance, inclusivity, making the schools and our young people sort of, like Laura said, broadening their minds, challenging them to think for themselves, and make them aware that there are other options than maybe the one that they've been presented with their whole life. So that's one of the aspects of what I'm doing. And the other one, I talked about raising the awareness amongst pupils, but also among teachers. So we're organising for the end of next month a teachers event. Again, partially just to raise the awareness of what Northern Ireland Humanists do, to make teachers aware that we do lead the campaigns to promote inclusivity in education, and that, I suppose, as well, if they have any particular issues within their own school, that we would be the people to come to and talk to about getting support or how to address them. So again, I would sort of echo what Laura said in terms of, if you are a teacher, if you know a teacher, if you have children in schools and there are issues that you would like that school to involve us, then please do let us know after tonight, because getting through the door is sometimes the hardest thing, and that's what I'm trying to do. So anybody that can make it more personable makes that job a little bit easier. So that's my role within it.
Thank you so much, Callum and Laura. And yeah, I think I should just point that out as well. All of the speakers here tonight, they're all willing to be contacted if you want to speak to them about any of the issues that have been raised, and especially over things like our pastoral care work and our education work here in Northern Ireland. You know, we are really looking to move those forward, and it might not be a case that you can volunteer for us, but you might have some connection that can help us push forward what it is that we're trying to do. So please do reach out to us. Last person, thank you, Callum, thank you, Laura. The last person that we're going to speak to from our big team tonight is our chair, Ian DuBois. And I think, Tim, you can interrogate our chair.
Interrogate him.
Interrogate him. Ask him how he thinks the last 5 years has gone. So Ian DuBois, our chair, has been with us for the full 5 years. And I know Ian's been involved in the humanist organisations for a very long time. Ian.
As you can tell by my grey hairs how long I've been in it.
Ian, let's be honest. Obviously, the best thing Boyd ever did was sign me up. But apart from that, what do you think of the highlights for you of the last 5 years? Because you have been at the coalface for a long time. What for you are the highlights, and where do you think we're going to head in the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously one of the biggest highlights has to be the legalization of humanist weddings. I think particularly not just because it offers, young couples and the opportunity really to have their values recognized and so on, but actually, along with humanist funerals, it's one of the biggest PR exercises that we have. So we're able to reach dozens, scores, hundreds of people that way, and I think the profile we've had has been, really massively increased by that. But I mean, we've talked about the work in prisons and so on, and that has really been a highlight for us. We haven't made so much progress in hospitals just yet, so that's somewhere we want to go. You asked about where we're going. I think we've made a lot of friends and are influencing people at Stormont. I think that's a very important area for us, really, and we're hoping to make the most of that. And so it's surprising. I think you got a hint of that. It's surprising where you might find friends up on the hill. Actually, I know you make fun of them every week, but actually they're not all bad.
The other thing to say in as well is, I know a lot of this is very serious, but we've had a couple of great nights as well. We've had a couple of great nights of entertainment. This is fun. There are people out there going, this thing very serious. We've had a couple of great nights of entertainment in the Black Box with comedians and music and stuff like that. I mean, it is fun as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's one thing we haven't got, I suppose, is a choir or a band or anything just yet. But I know Boyd's into that. Rave music, and I can't stand it, so we're looking for any volunteers on that score.
Yeah, anybody who has better taste in music than me is welcome to join the organization. Ian, it's been a pleasure having you involved, from the beginning. Ian's been, again, really, really important with all of our planning work over the last 5 years as well, and has been, I have to say, has been a massive support to me over the last 5 years, and I really, really, really do appreciate that. And I think, Tim, we wanted you maybe to give us a little sum up of what you think about our last 5 years before you hand over to Mr. Copson, who I see is
well, before we hand over to the boss, could I just say on a slightly personal note, and I don't want to embarrass you, Boyd, but it is very important. I know there's loads of volunteers, but your role has been absolutely vital, and I think you should take a lot of credit for creating what we have now. And I feel very optimistic, despite, you think the blasphemy laws and we've got equal marriage, we've now got humanist marriages, we've now got a lot more people going to humanist funerals and humanist weddings and things like that. I think humanism is the new thing, and I think we've earned a lot of friends. We haven't been aggressive to anybody. We haven't pissed people off. The publicity we get is very positive. I think when we go on program, when you've been on lots of things like Talkback and stuff, when you argue with religious people, you do it in a rational, reasonable way, despite a lot of provocation sometimes. And I think that is very, very positive. And I think this part of the world that is often seen as, it's just Protestants and Catholics, and outside we're seen as, deeply, deeply religious. I think times are changing, and we're at the forefront of that, and we should be very proud of what we've achieved. And I think our future is very bright. And is that you, Andrew? Does that mean you can give Boyd a pay rise, and we're going to split it? Isn't that right, Boyd?
Yeah, if we can sort that out. Mr. Copson,
we can have a proper party sometime soon when we're allowed.
Indeed. We'll definitely have to have a proper party. That's for sure. So, lastly, this evening we have Andrew Copson, who is the Chief Executive of Humanists UK, and also my dear friend, Andrew.
I'm just so sorry that we can't all be in Belfast this evening. Everyone at Northern Ireland Humanists has given all the Humanists UK staff and trustees and volunteers who've ever visited there such a warm welcome. We've had some good nights there in the last few years. I'd just like to say that this is my 11th year now as Chief Executive of Humanists UK. And even if I go for another 11 years and another 11 years after that, which I probably won't, but even if I did, the creation of Northern Ireland Humanists would still be one of the things that I'm absolutely proudest of. The creation of Northern Ireland Humanists, the appointment of Boyd at the beginning, and the appointment of Ian have been, I think, the biggest thing to happen in the modern history of the humanist movement in the UK. If you think 5 years ago about the goals that this section set itself, legalising humanist marriages, working for same-sex marriage, fully decriminalising abortion, having a single education system seriously discussed, getting humanist pastoral care into institutions, getting humanism into schools to be talked about really for the first time in a serious way, ever in schools in Northern Ireland. They, to me, to be honest, seemed incredibly ambitious. And I slightly looked askance at Boyd thinking, okay, well, you know, it's good to have high ambitions. And so maybe we'll go with it. That decision has been rewarded in spades because, as we've heard this evening, we've had such progress in all those areas, with most of them ticked off as complete and done, and only a couple of them left to go, and looks like they'll be delivered very quickly. And it's clear to me, as an outsider to Northern Ireland, but now a frequent visitor, that Northern Ireland has changed, is changing, and that you are all part of that generational and once in a lifetime change that societies go through very seldom, but that a large number of Western countries have gone through in the last 50 years, and Northern Ireland is going through today, and because of, as well as in line with what you're doing. All of our 3,000 members and supporters in Northern Ireland, an unimaginably large number it was 5 years ago, all the hundreds and hundreds of happy couples that we've married, everything that everyone has done has contributed to that. And I have spent a lot of time with all of the people who we've heard from this evening, but for many of you in the audience, for the first time that you've seen or heard from them, you should be, I'm sure you are, incredibly proud of what they're achieving and what they say about Northern Ireland today by their existence and their work. And I hope that you will all find ways of getting more involved. The hard work that they've put in has paid enormous dividends. You'll see in the next couple of days when they release their report on the last 5 years, not only the amazing work that's happened, but also that the report we're publishing to mark that work, contains statements of support from leadership figures from the DUP, Sinn Féin, the UUP, the SDLP, the Alliance Party, and People Before Profit. Every single principal political party in Northern Ireland has sent a frontline person out to give a quote to praise the work of humanists in the last 5 years in Northern Ireland. That really is the cherry on top of the once unimaginable cake. The whole of the UK is with the organised humanist movement in Northern Ireland, supporting it. Northern Ireland Humanists is part of our 100,000 strong membership across the UK, all pulling in the same direction, all working to change society for the better in exactly the same ways. And I know that Boyd is going to now tell you how you can all be more involved in that work. Before I pass over to him, though, I want to thank Boyd for the incredible work that he's put in, and really the progress would have been impossible without him. And also to Tim, who has been occasionally amusing, but always dedicated to all the events that we put in, and who has been actually in the last 5 years as well an incredibly important figurehead. I've seen the respect that he commands in the events that I've attended with him in Northern Ireland. So thank you to Tim for your invaluable support.
That's going on the posters. Occasionally amusing. Thank you.
Yeah, look, Andrew and Tim, again, thank you both as well, especially Tim for coming along tonight and everything that you do for us. Also, there's an enormous amount of people that that aren't getting thanked here tonight, and a lot of those people are based in our our London office, our PAP team, the likes of Richie and Liam, who's our comms person, and all the team behind our ceremonies work and our pastoral care work. I mean, there's an awful lot of people that put in an awful lot of hard work, and here in Northern Ireland, we're always eager to get more people involved, and we're always eager to have more volunteers or people who can support us. And you can drop us an email at info@nihumanists.org if you would like to volunteer with us. And also, if you're not a member, could I encourage you to join up as a member? There are lots of different options out there for membership, for families. Also, there's a student membership, which I believe is free. So do have a look into the membership, and it's really important that we do keep that support with our members and supporters. And as Andrew Copson said, we started here 5 years ago with, I think it was 230 people on the database with a BT postcode, and now we're coming up to that 3,000 number, and it's just been really, really exciting over the last 5 years doing this work, and I feel incredibly privileged to be able to carry it out and to be able to do this for everyone here, and I hope that I can continue doing it into the future. And I just want to say one last thing, which is thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for all of the people who spoke tonight. And again, thank you to all the Humanist UK staff. And here's to another 5 years. And here's to Tim McGarry.
Happy birthday, Humanists.
Bye.